Welcome to the Sunrise Project podcast. It's lovely to have you join us. This is a space where we explore conversations on racism and reconciliation with neighbors in our community. And today we get to be here with Tyler Goens and Dorothy Swain, two people that have been on the podcast before. It's lovely to have you back and lovely to get to be all together. But let's take a moment and share with us about where we can find you out and about in the community.
All right. My name is Dorothy, and I am a semi-retired science teacher, still teaching part-time at RCC, so you'll definitely see me on campus. I am an avid fan of the public transportation system, so you'll see me riding the bus. I help manage some of the demonstration garden beds at the fairgrounds, so you'll see me over at the fairgrounds quite a bit. And now that I'm semi-retired, you'll just see me out and about wherever something catches my interest around town.
My name's Tyler. I'm a semi-retired soccer coach, and did that for about a decade at North Valley High School. And but we just had a little one, and so now that's taking a little bit more of my time. And then I'm also a pastor in town at River Valley.
Beautiful. Actually, Dorothy, would you also share where we could find you on maybe every Sunday?
Oh, yes.
Almost any Sunday.
So I also attend the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship downtown on E Street.
Nice. And to give myself some context as well, you can find me on Sundays at Pursuit Nazarene Church, which is off on Harbeck, and out and about. And I'm a homeschooling mama too. That's another big thing in my life. But yeah, so before we dive into our big topic for today, I wanted to dig a little bit into some of the fears that come up in doing some of this work. Fear of judgment is one of the things that particularly comes up in podcasts, but also just in normal conversations with people that you might not know as well. Conversations on racism have a lot of those fears that am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to, one of my fears early on was, a big one was being afraid that I would cause more harm, that I'm going to say something that's going to hurt someone, whether it's my neighbors that are conservative or my neighbors that are people of color. It's going to happen. And that fear around that, there's some others that I have that I'm going to try to articulate and ponder. But I wondered if there's any others that you two have that come up or that you think of in regards to conversations on racism, and what kind of fears come up.
Well, I think that fear of being judged is huge. I think that shame is a pretty big part of our culture. When I can't speak for all families, but when I was growing up, shame was a major disciplinary tool, right? That was used. And I have shaken a lot of it, but I still carry a lot of it. So one of my big fears in talking about racism is that I will discover by saying, I discover what I think by listening to what I say. I will discover by listening to what I say out loud that I am a racist and therefore a bad person. And I would rather just keep my mouth shut in that situation. So that fear of being judged is very much there.
Yeah. What about you, Tyler?
Yeah, you've talked about how, and we talked about this even before, how when someone says a word, racism, all of us have different definitions and different perspectives as to what that looks like, and so I guess fear of people immediately dismissing you when you use coded language like that. I think so. I'm a thinker. I have a fear of being wrong, so that's maybe one hesitation for engaging in this conversation. I don't know enough. I've not done enough research. I don't have all the answers, So that's maybe one fear too, that I don't feel equipped to have this conversation.
Yeah. Don't feel equipped. Yeah. We talk a lot about process in our work, but also in particular in this podcast, because there's something about a podcast that when you are, you're frozen in time. So I will continue to grow and learn after this time. There will be something that I say that I might, even within this time, learn from and change and grow. But we don't get to share all of that process. We experience each other just in single moments of our process. And often I'm guilty of freezing other people in that experience that I had with them and forgetting that, oh no, they're continuing on like that. I wonder where they're at in their process now. One of the things that I recently experienced kind of a deeper, there's always this process of the fears kind of coming up to the surface. I feel like doing this work actually brings a lot of things up to the surface. Sometimes it's anger or bitterness, realizing all this gunk that comes up. And then getting to do this work also, there's a lot of transformation that I get to experience in that process. And so some of the transformation and the freeing has been that reminder of how important it is to just name that for me and my fear of, I will get things wrong, and that's going to happen. And everybody, just so you know, that's going to happen. And I'm going to say the wrong thing. And I want to keep learning. I want to keep growing. And if you're interested in somehow sharing with us how we can do that, our ears are open and our hearts are ready. And yeah.
Yeah, I think I want to add to that you say that there's a certain freedom in recognizing that you're going to get things wrong, and that it's fine to speak anyway.
Yeah.
And I would say that I need to recognize that I am racist in some ways.
Yes.
And it is okay to have those statements come out of my mouth because I am not frozen in time. Yes. I am continually growing and changing. And if it just stays there and festers rather than being said out loud, then I lose that opportunity for growth.
Very much so. Yeah. Yeah. There's something about that. We don't need to be afraid of what we're going to discover. Like we can put it out there, because sometimes that's the only way you discover it is being in process and saying it out loud. And then you can keep growing. Yeah.
That is one of the dangers too of having conversations like this, only like this with microphones, because it's performative at some level.
Yes.
And like I'm always nervous on podcast or video or sermons, because that's frozen in time and it's permanent. It's all over. So not to say that this is what we're doing is bad, but it's how much more important to have so many, conversations outside of, the podcast studio.
Yes. Very much so. And there's that, I think part of my hope actually with the podcast is that we can have these conversations and kind of model how we're figuring it out. Like the podcast, that we don't actually have it all together, that part of it is figuring it out, and that it can look messy and we can still hang in there with each other, and we can not know. And afterwards, when I freak out over something that I said, that I can take deep breaths and remind myself, I can give myself grace for we're still in process. And so it's an amplified setting being in a podcast, but yeah, thank you for sharing these things. Now, the reason why we are all gathered today is because we all attended an interview that took place about a month ago, maybe?
I think so.
Tre Giles came into town. He was brought into town and hosted by a couple different local community members. Trevor at the Hive offered his space. The House of Glory, we got empanadas from them to share as oh my gosh, so good. As we got to hear the interview. And so Tre Giles, just some background, is the pastor of Justice and Mercy at a church in Bridgetown. Now, clearly that kind of gives some context of
Bridgetown where?
Bridgetown in Portland. Thank you. So that was a very specific digging into what does this mean and what does this look like in the church. But we had the honor of having some others that were present with us that are in different kinds of church settings. And so it's really fun to get to be here together to kind of share together what was meaningful from that, and what did we take, and what is meaningful for our community. What kinds of things could be accessible to our wider community, and how does it relate to our work that we're doing? And so I'm excited to get to dig into that. And let's kind of start with, what was meaningful to you? So, Dorothy, would you?
Well, there were several things, and I will pick one to start with.
Yeah, we can do rounds on a couple others.
And I think that he used the word proximity a lot in paired with kinship. So proximity and kinship, that it is our being physically near to other people. Is important when we want to develop our community, to grow our sense of community, to increase our welcome that we offer to all members of our community. And so I think that proximity was a big one for me. I tend to be kind of an introvert, and I think that, like I can go out and have my interactions with a few people that I see regularly, and and I can really also at the same time work on extending myself to be in proximity with more people in our community, and people from different walks of life, and that's really important to learn how to have those conversations that stray a little bit out of the comfort zone than the conversations I'm used to having, because I'm in proximity with somebody new.
Yeah, along those lines, just the idea of just how a lot of these social justice issues are often so relational, or lack thereof.
Yeah.
And
Lack thereof.
The relate, like, poverty or homelessness, houselessness, there are financial problems, but often there are deeper relational problems. I think Tre used the idea of, okay, it's not homelessness, it's Bob, like where he actually there's a face, there's a name, there's a story that kind of makes it not just an issue anymore. There's a person, there's a relationship, there's a context, and so I too really enjoyed the proximity part of his talk.
Let's talk a little bit more about that proximity, because he brought it up in a couple different ways.
Yeah.
One other word he used that in connection to proximity was building relational equity. That was really interesting for me, because there are so many moments where our relationships are not on equal ground, and we might not realize it. And that's something that I'm still seeking to form that thought on how to talk about it in those terms. But he talked about how proximity helps build that relational equity, that I know you and you know me. Like there's this back and forth, there's space for each of us in this.
And he added to that when we're in proximity and we're building a relationship, we're going to often find a lot more common ground, like things that we share that, it becomes when we're, eating empanadas, or I forgot the other thing he said, but there's a shared, you begin to talk more about some of your common interests and your shared values than maybe some of the things that would divide you if you're talking on social media or in other ways.
Yes. That distance, when we're not as proximate, when we're farther apart, it's easier to just see our differences, maybe, or our divisions, as opposed to, oh, wait a minute, there's a lot we have in common.
It's harder to fight like in person,
Yeah,
or over a cup of coffee, or they say like in your car you're way more like angry, but because you've got something in between that other person, and you feel like you're in your own little bubble, but like you would never maybe say some of those things or flip the bird to people like over a meal, like over empanadas. You wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
So there's something about food, there's something about the table that that kind of levels the ground and builds relational intimacy.
Yeah.
And he talked about food quite a bit.
He
did.
You know, we had food there at that event. The empanadas were great, and equity built right in because I'm a vegetarian, and there were potato empanadas that I could eat, and so there was some thought to making the food widely shareable, not just to people with one kind of diet, and so that was important. He also talked about doing monthly feasts at their church, where they would go out onto the streets and invite people in one-on-one, not just putting up a sign or a flyer around or putting a notice on social media, but going out and finding people where they are and inviting them to come in and share a meal with us. Not come in and we will give you a meal and then go home and sit down and have our own meal later,
right.
but come in and share a meal with us where we're all eating together. And the power of food was a big part of that talk, and that hit home for me.
Yeah, yeah. One of the other things that's been an interesting thought for me in the context of proximity is the way that it has started to hold me accountable. There's some, I have the personality where I can get passionate about things that I know nothing about. And I can like get riled up about stuff that like, I really haven't done any study on this, or I haven't spent time really listening and learning. And so it's been an interesting, this is something that's grown in my process of doing this work. I've seen a growth there. But there's also this piece of if I'm not proximate to somebody that is like the most vulnerable in that situation, I wonder if I should hold my tongue. Like I might really not know what I'm saying. And so there's this balance of being present and being in the conversation. And then the moments when I'm not actually in the conversation, but I kind of want to stand on the side and shout or like say something. And so that piece of like, it's brought some like another nuance to the accountability of, have I listened to anybody lately that's really directly affected by this issue that I want to say something about? And if I haven't, maybe I should wait a little bit.
Well, I loved what he said about being a person who walks into the room and turns the temperature down.
Yeah.
Because he's like, I could come in here and really rile some feathers here in Southern Oregon. And but that's not what he did. He came in with a posture of humility, with humor. He emphasized how laughter is actually really important. And that's another thing that brings us together, is when we're laughing together. There's something that brings us together, even chemically, when we do that.
Yeah.
And so I like that idea of being a person who walks into a room and takes the temperature down a little bit. The phrase that was the real worth the price of admission was the meet hostility with hospitality. That's probably on your list.
Yes, it is. Let's dig into that. That's
Sure.
yeah. Keep talking on that, Tyler.
Just meet hostility with hospitality. And I'd love to listen to his sermon too. He said he had a sermon coming up that he was nervous about.
Right.
It'd be fun to listen to that and see how that went. I'm sure it went well. But what a great idea. And then kind of following up, building off that, it's like, well, meet hostility with curiosity. I feel like you're really good at that, Gabby. You turn the temperature down in a room in a really good way, and you like meet hostility with curiosity as well, and it just kind of makes us all like able to breathe a little bit and think a little bit, and that was definitely the highlight phrase for me. Probably for many of us.
Yeah. Dorothy, you had some thoughts on that earlier.
Well, I'm going in a number of different directions now, but one of the things he said in the context of meeting hostility with hospitality was that everybody wants to feel validated. And sometimes you don't even need to respond with words. You can respond with a hug. You can respond with a smile. And you can disagree and keep your mouth shut sometimes and just offer a hug. And that is immensely powerful. I want to come back to what you were saying about meeting people one-on-one in proximity, maybe across a meal at the same table, and I get to know you and you get to know me. And so I'm noticing that there's a little kind of tension there for me, productive tension about I feel an obligation to allow the person I'm talking to know me. And that means not holding my tongue.
Oh, yes.
And so it's important, I think, to say something of what you feel in a situation, something of what you believe in a situation. And you certainly don't need to lecture, right? Or pretend to have an authority that you don't have. But I think that give and take of I listen to you, and now if we're going to hold a productive tension in this conversation and have it be fruitful, I must offer you something of me in return. And so I think it has to flow both ways.
It's that equity, that
Yeah.
relational equity.
Yep.
I am present and you are present. And it can sometimes be very challenging
Right.
to be present too. It's
Right.
Yeah.
And I also think just that meeting hostility with hospitality reminds me of the biblical example of Jesus turning the other cheek. And that is something that we are not practiced at doing. And that a lot of people see that Bible story as kind of a sign of weakness. Well, it was okay for Jesus, but I need to be tough in the world somehow. And it doesn't have to be done weakly. That it is such a gift to be able to turn the temperature down in the room, to not respond to hostility with hostility, but without totally caving in at the same time, right? It's that I still have that obligation to be present and to offer something of what I feel, even when I'm being hospitable.
I can't help but think of the civil rights activists during the 60s who did the nonviolent trainings, because it's that reality of everything in us wants to respond in kind. Like it's our natural reaction. It's not even like, it's not maliciousness or evil. This is like, you can have not malicious intent, you know what I mean? And just respond in kind. Like this is the back and forth of you're angry, well, I'm angry. Like you have to train yourself to meet that hostility with a relaxedness in your body and in your mind and in your heart. And that's not something that I think sometimes we tell ourselves that like, oh, it's only when you're thinking maliciously about somebody or that you really don't like them that you're going to respond in those ways. Like, no, hospitality when you're being met with hostility and you're giving out hospitality, that is very active. It is not a passive thing. It's a very active, powerful, meaningful thing that does change the game. He shared that story about Tyler, you were talking about this earlier, the protest that he'd organized and the gentleman that was there, and how he was being screamed at, but Tre didn't respond in kind. So he was using that as his example for meeting hostility with hospitality. And years later, when the man connects with him again and says, I have changed my mind. Like I no longer think the way I used to think about people like you, and I'm sorry. And I've told all of my family and but just that, like, it takes time.
And it is, I think part of that story that was so important to me was that the man who was shouting at Tre was shouting kind of from the safety and anonymity of a truck across the street.
Oh, how interesting.
And,
yes.
And Tre was a little more vulnerable, standing there exposed on the other side of the street.
Yeah.
And Tre was that was when he was a college student in Kansas, and he came back years later to be a youth pastor at the church. And just by doing his daily work every day, trying to be a good man, the community was watching him. And so the other guy didn't just change his mind in a vacuum.
Right.
It was all those small daily acts that that Tre did in his work that caused him to change his mind. And it was so many years later, and there was so much anonymity from that truck that when he invited Tre out, Tre didn't know who he was. Yeah. He, do you want to come out? You want to come out for coffee? Well, he's the youth pastor. He'll pretty much have coffee with anyone, so he agrees. And they have kind of an awkward conversation until he says what he really came there for, which is, as you described it. But there's so many levels and so much richness to that story. I just love it.
I did too. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was special.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other pieces on that? Meeting hostility with hospitality that are coming to mind, or should we shift?
Well, I want to say one more thing about that. And that is one of the phrases that comes up a lot in our Grant's Pass Remembrance work, which is holding a seat at the table for everyone. That meeting hostility with hospitality is not only in proximity to somebody, it's even when they're not there. That when people aren't at our table, members of our community aren't at our table, and we're not in the same room with them, that it is still important. It is still, I'm still called to treat that person with hospitality and hold a seat at the table for them and offer that hospitality even when they're not there.
Yeah.
That Greek word for hospitality literally means love of strangers, and it's not just entertaining your friends. It's actually love for the stranger and
the other.
Yeah, the other, and so that's kind of a cool way to think about that too.
Yeah,
it's really beautiful.
Yeah, that makes me think about a nuance on. For me, it was a nuance on proximity, that the realization that we live in a majority white community. So in conversations on racism, the person that now in my work, I do get the honor of getting to be proximate to my Black neighbors. And that's also very essential because it means that we're listening in and they're giving, they're sharing thoughts about what they'd like to see happen and what do they want to have happen at events. And we're getting those conversations. But for the majority of the people that I connect with, that's going to be a very hard thing to be proximate in person and in friendships with people of color. We certainly have a lot of people of color in our community, but we are a majority white community. And I've realized that part of the proximity that I'm called to is to be proximate to my neighbors that have a conservative culture background and my neighbors that have a liberal culture background. And in particular for me, because there are ways in which I identify with liberal culture in some ways, that I really do need to be very proximate, very intentional in my friendships, in my listening, in that relational equity with my neighbors that have that conservative cultural background. And so that's been an interesting thing to think about, the other, the love of the other. Who are the others? And in other ways, my conservative cultural friends, they are not the other because they're also Christians. And so they're in other ways, they're not the other. And so it's an interesting dynamic to identify those places where who are the others in my life and in the areas that I'm tempted to other people, and how can I come close and be proximate to them? Yeah, and how all of that is a part of these conversations on racial reconciliation, hospitality, and all of this is justice. All of this is justice work, and when you grow in these areas, you're growing in all the other areas too. You're gathering tools that will be applicable in every other area. I don't know if that made sense. But
sure. It seems like in a lot of justice work, it's very easy to get bitter, angry, cynical.
Yeah.
And I think there's that constant temptation to not be consumed by the cause in a way that makes you a worse person. And so, yeah, that constant, effort towards hospitality, towards the right kind of vulnerability, kind of watching very carefully for any kind of moral superiority. Jesus tells those stories like where the Pharisee and the tax collector, right? The Pharisee who's like, man, God, thank you. I'm not like that tax collector. But then even as we're reading the story, we're like, oh, God, thank you. I'm not like that Pharisee, that right-wing conservative Pharisee. So it's just so easy to morally elevate ourselves. You know what I mean?
Yes.
When
Yes,
we
I do,
this,
Tyler.
You don't seem like you're a morally superior person.
God has done a lot of transforming work and has a long way to go. Were you
that's
saying
it.
that? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I was thinking about in relation to Tre's message was that he answered a question about is there a danger of justice work replacing gospel as the foundation of our church? And his response was that justice work is gospel. And I was thinking about that that extends to so many areas. Like I come from a Unitarian Universalist church that some people don't even want to call it a church. It's a fellowship rather than a church. And we have Christian roots, but we are not explicitly Christian. We have our 7 principles that we follow. And I think that sometimes people could say the same thing of, is there a danger of justice work replacing our 7 principles? Well, justice work is our 7 principles. Justice work is the gospel. Justice work is the Quran. Justice work is the foundation of almost every religious and ethical system that's in the world. And so I think of that justice work as being a bridge between different kinds of differences that we can be proximate to. And I love that you are talking about the diversity of diversities. That, you put any 2 people in the same room and there is diversity. You just have to find it. And we talk a lot about finding common ground between us and people we know are different from us. And I love the idea of trying to seek out diversity between ourselves and people that we presume to be similar to us.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
I must have missed that question that was asked to him. But I think sometimes we maybe have a false dichotomy between gospel and justice. But, I think maybe in the Bible they're more related. That gospel is the announcement that there's a new king, King Jesus, and a new kingdom breaking in my understanding of it. And it's a kingdom of life, joy, and peace that's breaking into this old age that's passing away. And so, like, I want all of it, I want the gospel, I want justice, I want anything that is a part of God's kingdom. And sounds like he answered that question well, though.
I think that was one of my favorite parts of this whole time was for many years now, I've been doing racial reconciliation work. It is racial justice work as well. There's been this growth of realizing how big and how meaningful justice is. But many of I think both our culture and churches don't really know how to talk about justice very well. I think our culture often thinks about justice when they think about revenge, which isn't actually justice. Like I think of justice in that, love God, love others. Like there's this leveling of the playing field that Jesus does, this inviting to everybody to the table that he does, that is justice and mercy all in one. And so it was just so fun to hear him talk in a language that, like, I don't often get to, I read it, but I don't get to hear it with words in my own community as often. And so that piece of justice being so integral was just one of my favorite parts of that gathering.
And I'm not sure if Tre quoted Cornel West or not. I think he might have, but I'm not sure. But there's a beautiful quote about justice is what love looks like in public.
Oh, wow.
And,
That's great.
And
That's
so
beautiful.
that seems to pertain to what
Very
we're talking
much
about
so.
here.
Justice
What's
is
Cornell-
what
Cornell
love
West?
looks-
Cornell West.
I
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
great.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and that ties all together with the meeting hostility with hospitality.
Yes.
This proximity that says, "No, I'm going to get to know you. Like I want to know about even if we're motivated by the issue, homelessness. What's going on with homelessness, houselessness? My neighbors that are dealing with this, and so I'm going to come close and I'm going to get to know you. There's a beautiful thing there about that is justice at work. Yeah. Now I had another thing that was like on the edges of my thoughts, but do either of you have any thoughts right now? Well, I like Hunt here.
No, I'm going to take that justice quote home. I like that. Justice is love worked out in public.
I think it's what love looks like in
Love
public.
looks like in
Yeah.
public. That's cool.
But that's if I'm remembering it correctly.
I'll go, yeah.
Right. So
Sounds good to me.
I hope it was Cornell West, and I hope it was those words.
One of the other pieces I wanted to mention with proximity is that conversation came up with Emily and Mike Green. I don't know if you know them with Common Ground Conversations, and they shared about, there are many ways we can become proximate to people. Reading a book that was written by somebody it had that lived experience that we're interested in drawing close to and drawing near to. There is a lot of listening to podcasts, by listening to people be interviewed. There are a lot of ways that we can be proximate. Sometimes we can feel that but I can't do that. I can't add another somebody in my life. How do I do that? And so we can work that in. I think of the tone guide that Tre talked about, how shaping our language so it's dignifying and not damaging. And one of the things that he said the Racial Justice Committee does is that they look into, hey, where are you getting all of your quotes? Are you just accessing white male, are you just theologians for your quotes in your sermons, or are you bringing in a diversity of perspectives? Because that's another way that we can practice proximity is bringing in these pieces, and it's something that we kind of forget that, oh wait, there's a diversity of ways in that too. Yeah,
that's been enriching for me because there is no substitute for an in-person conversation with somebody.
Yes.
But with that said, we have so many our access to information and perspectives is so much greater now than it's ever been. The books we can read, the podcasts we can listen to. And so being in a town like Grants Pass, I do feel blessed that I can have some of the, be proximate in some of those other ways that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And I would say too that there are different ways of reading a book. And I can see myself reading a book about somebody different from me, wanting to solidify that difference and say,
that's really
thank,
interesting, yes.
thank goodness I'm not like that person.
Yeah.
And that's very different from reading that book as with a desire to gain proximity.
Sure.
And so I think of proximity as being almost like a lens that you can look through. Am I looking through my proximity lens, or am I looking through my self-protective lens right now? And so that reading a book can bring you into proximity with a person if you are intentionally wanting to do that.
Yeah.
That's true.
And it can bring you closer
It's almost your
than having a
posture.
conversation without that intention.
Totally.
That's really interesting. Posture makes such a difference.
Yes.
Yeah.
When you're reading a book, it could be a dialogue with that person, even if they're
Yes.
not alive anymore.
Yes.
You're having a conversation with them. It's like, oh, I agree with that, or oh, I'm struggling with that a little bit. Let's converse some more.
Yes. Yes. And the different like that. There's a chewing of that happens in our lives. Yeah.
I heard one Christian thinker. He said he doesn't like to read books that he agrees with. He likes to only for the most part, he likes to read books that he disagrees with. He's like, why do I want to read something I already agree with? I want my thinking to be challenged and stretched and to engage with. And I thought, oh wow, that's often the opposite of my. I want an easy book that I agree with and can get some quotes that I agree with, and but I mean, I'm sure you'd be a lot like the intellectual muscles would really be stretched by doing that.
Yep.
Tyler, I know you enough to know that you don't just read books that you agree with, but
True,
I know,
but
I
they're
can
easier.
understand.
Yeah.
I can understand. Oh.
Like before bed, I just want to read something I agree with, or some fiction.
Yes.
Go to bed angry.
Something easy. Yeah. Yeah. There's a tension that we hold when we read books that with someone that we disagree with, and are we willing to sit in that and really wonder and be curious? It definitely takes energy.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, it's good. It's good and worthwhile, but it's a full thing. Yeah, I wanted to bring up something that kind of came up at the interview. Yeah, it did come up at the interview. We are in an interesting year. We're in a year with a major election coming up, and I think in many ways that meeting, it came up, I think, in the context of the meeting hostility with hospitality. We will have a lot of opportunities probably to practice that in the coming year. And one of the things so Taylor Stewart, who's the executive director with Goens and Remembrance Project, who we partner with, has been talking about what would a Sunrise community look like the day after an election. And one of his thoughts is, part of it is he's trying to think through, like, I don't even know how to talk about this because our winning, losing language is so sports-like that it makes it almost hard to use those languages while trying to change our perspective on how we engage with stuff. But one of his thoughts is, what if the group that voted for the candidate that got in, that got that position. Okay, what if the team that won said to the other team, "You still matter to me. You still matter to me, and I want to work together." And we can do that on a local level, whether or not the group that we most identify with does that. And that's just really intrigued me.
I like that. I picture a community gathering at a community center where it's decided in advance what the agenda will be, that before you know the election outcome, that, team win, right, will stand up and say why they're glad that their team won.
Yeah.
And team loser, right, will stand up and say what they most fear in the coming period. Oh. And then team winner will brainstorm ways to help prevent the thing that team loser most fears. And you don't know what it is in advance.
Wow.
But we all agree that building community is so important that whatever the outcome, we are going to work intentionally to work on something of importance to the group that did not win that election.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be so cool.
I know, wouldn't it?
I want in. Tyler, where does your brain go with all that?
Yeah, I mean that I love that idea. That it's high risk, high reward.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
High risk, high reward.
But I mean, in Tre's language, it's going to suck.
Yes, right.
I think there is probably just coming to peace with that. That it's a very polarized time, and it's not going to be fun. And we're going to do our best, but yeah, to I guess maybe not have too high of expectations on I don't know. I don't know if that's overly cynical or pessimistic. But yeah, I know as a church leader, I'm concerned about pastoring people through this, whether and the fear, that language that gets thrown around. But yeah, we know it's gonna be hard, but I think the more we focus on local, I think that's often just a good maybe antidote to the excessive focus on national things that might affect us, but do they?
Yeah.
Not in the same ways. But anyway.
Yeah. One of the things I think about, you use the word expectation, and kind of what do we do with our expectations? I have found for myself in the process of doing this work that there are moments when there are solid moments when my expectation actually leads me more to anger than it leads me to love. And how there are spaces where if I let go of expectation, both the expectation that it's going to be absolutely terrible, but also that like, hey, it might be absolutely terrible, but like this expectation of, or just maybe the curiosity that like, I wonder what will come. I wonder how I can connect with people. There's a curiosity. Like I have been thinking about this idea that Taylor shared for a while, but it wasn't until you were talking that I thought, oh, I wonder how I could be saying you matter to me before the election happens. And continuing to say that to good. Those that I might totally disagree with, or no, I do totally disagree with, but like they still matter to me, and they're the reasons why they're voting are very different and very diverse, and so it matters to me that I'm relaxed enough to be able to hear that too, and be able to talk about it and to be able to understand what's important to them and what matters. And it's astounding how easy it can get in the way of what I see. Oh, well, why don't you see this?
Right.
So how can I be saying, it's a little bit of that, he talked about smaller mouths, bigger ears.
Big ears, small mouth.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, a little bit of that in there.
Good.
Right? Jesus was asked 300 questions in the Bible and answered 10.
Right.
It's bigger ears, smaller mouth. Yeah.
And asked lots of questions.
Asked lots of questions.
Yes.
How can we ask more questions and be ready to really listen?
I'm thinking about your thoughts on expectations.
Yeah.
And how expectations set up either success or failure, right? Because either the expectation is met
interesting.
or it's not met.
Yeah.
And I've been spending a lot of time lately thinking about the two sides of pride and guilt, and how often they go together. And I think this is connected in some way. I have, if I let go of expectations, I give up guilt and pride simultaneously, and I become just another ordinary person in the community, which is who I want to be. I want to be just another ordinary person in the community, as extraordinary as everyone else around me is.
Yeah.
And I think that letting go that you're talking about has lots of little ripple out repercussions that can help us spiritually and emotionally and psychologically, as well as helping with justice work.
That's good.
We're going to start wrapping up in a bit because Tyler has a dentist appointment we want to get him to. But I got to say, I had never thought before about how agenda and expectations might be related. We've been having a lot of conversations on agenda and how much that can get in the way of having these conversations and people feeling free to be a part of them, because we don't have a secret hidden agenda that we're actually going to reveal to you later on. Like, they're like, we are figuring this out together as we go.
Yes.
And we are listening to all the different people at the table, and the different people at the table might have a lot of different things to say that might seem diverse, or opposed, which is why we hold tension. But agenda does kind of clarify for me, what are the ways that I do have agenda for people, and how could I release that? Because I think I still got it.
An agenda and expectation is so intertwined.
Yes.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes. Yeah.
No, that's helpful. Because it's so easy with an agenda or with expectations to begin to treat people like obstacles or objects instead of as people.
Trophies.
Yes.
Sure, or means to an end, or obstacles to that end.
Yep.
And then often with expectations, it's just naming them.
Yeah.
Even like with relationships in our lives with people we care about. It's just sharing them, but then not holding so tightly to them.
Yeah. So bringing it up or naming, I do have an agenda and here it is. And then sometimes it's almost that this work, when you bring the bitterness and the anger to the surface, if you stay engaged and present to it, it will be transformed. Like this is part of what happens. And so when you see those expectations and agendas, to name them. And I think there is something that happens in that process that helps us hold them lighter and to remember the person. I want to hang on to the person. I want to use all my energy to hang on to you as a person, not this other thing.
Sure.
Yeah. Any other thoughts that we want to share before we close off? Anything rising to the surface that we want to end on?
I just want to talk about storytelling.
Yes.
And the importance of owning your own story and telling your own story without agenda or expectation. I may wish for some outcome to occur. And if I go into an interaction willing to simply tell my story about why this issue is important to me, it goes so much better than if I go into the interaction with an agenda to tell the story to a certain end. The story itself is its own end, and we need to share our stories with each other.
There's a freedom and a hope in that picture that I really like. Well, thank you so much, Dorothy. And Tyler, thank you so much.
Sure.
It's just a joy to get to share this space with you two.
Pleasure.
Absolutely.